Hello everyone, my name's Karen and I'm one of the pastors at Lesmurdie Baptist Church, coming to you today via video because I'm away this weekend with Josh and the board at our annual board retreat. It's awesome that we can still be connected in this way, and I'm really pleased to be bringing you the fourth in our series. We've called the series The Stuff of Life, and we've borrowed that title from a book of the same title by Australian author Carl Fays. And what we're doing in this series is having a look at what it means to live life well in the everyday, what it means to live life well in the middle, and we're trying to draw a roadmap of sorts. Not a roadmap that will give us GPS precise coordinates for every step we take along the way, but a roadmap that will have some large signposts, some large navigation guides, I guess, that will help us do our best as we live life in the middle, in the everyday, and in our context from the point of view of a Christian worldview. Now, so far we've looked at the markers or the road signs of love. We've looked at forgiveness. Last week we looked at wisdom, and this week we are going to talk about relationships. Now, the story of God's involvement with humankind and our involvement with God, or the combined stories of God and human history, find their best expression, or their most comprehensive expression, I guess you would say, in the Bible. The Bible isn't the only place that you would get to hear about God or know about God, but it is a pretty impressive one-stop place to get in touch with the story, with God's story and the story of humankind. And the story starts right in Genesis with creation, and there's something very significant that happens in that creation story. It happens at the moment when God says, "It is not good for the man to be alone." So really early on, within a few chapters of the beginning of the Bible, we had this statement about the importance of relationships to human beings. Now, of course, it's not much further along before we see that even though relationships are important, they actually go wrong. And that happens when Adam and Eve decide to ignore the guidelines, effectively, that God had given them for living life well. I don't know why they did that. Probably the same reasons that you or I might do that. That sense of kind of wanting to be God, made in the image of God, but wanting to be God and have the powers and the full characteristics of who God is. But for whatever reason, Adam and Eve chose against the guidelines that God had given them. And effectively that dramatically broke their relationship with God, but it also broke their relationship with the rest of the created order. And in Genesis 3 verse 17 we read, "God said to Adam, 'Since you listened to your wife and ate from the tree whose fruit I commanded you not to eat, the ground is cursed because of you. All your life you will struggle to scratch a living from it.'" Okay, so early on in the story, there is broken relationship with God, and broken relationship with the rest of the created order, but also, of course, broken relationship between human beings. We saw that in the story where Adam is quick to blame Eve, and Eve gets very defensive and turns to find someone else to blame. But even if you don't want to make too much of it in that particular story, you can see that within a generation of Adam and Eve, things had gone badly wrong between human beings, because their own son Cain murdered their other son Abel. Okay, so that's the beginning of the story. Now, if you were to flick through very quickly to the end of the story, as far as it's captured in the Bible, if you were to flick through to Revelation, you will see that the story has taken on a much more hopeful air by the time we get to Revelation. Revelation, you may well know, is a record of some extraordinary visions that John, who was a friend of Jesus, had. John went to the Greek island of Patmos, and he had this series of extraordinary visions. They are very difficult to understand. The imagery in these visions it's not part of our everyday life, and it's something of science fiction, really, for most of us. And unfortunately, over the years, Revelation has been misunderstood and even misused. And we haven't got time today to look at what Revelation is actually all about, other than to say this one thing. Whatever you might make of the images and how things are going to play out, I think we would all agree that Revelation tells us that at the end of the story, as far as it's recorded in the Bible, there is the hope of healing for all relationships. Healing for human beings and God, healing between human beings and the created order, and healing between human beings. In Revelation 7 and verse 9, it says, John is speaking this, he says, "After this I saw a vast crowd, too great to count, from every nation and tribe and people and language, standing in front of the throne and before the Lamb," before Jesus. That sense of everybody coming together. And we know what we read in other places in Revelation, that harmony is going to be reinstated between humans and the created order. Okay, but our question for today then is, how do we live in the present, in the middle? How do we live between what was represented by Genesis and Revelation? How do we live between the brokenness and the healing? How do we have good relationships in the place that we find ourselves in now? Well, I'm going to refer to 4 values, and I'm borrowing from Carl Fay's, his language and ideas behind these 4 values. And we're going to look at these 4 values and what they have to say about healthy relationships. But I want to make friendship in particular the example that we lean into here. The values that we're going to talk about today can be applied very easily to all of our relationships, to marriage, to parenting, to relationships with colleagues. But I've been a bit inspired by an article that a friend of mine, John Jenks, sent me back in July this year, an article about friendship. So the article was written by Sheridan Voisey, and it appeared in print in the UK Times. And he was writing about what he calls friendship poverty and why he sees that's an issue. He says that he thinks in part the friendship poverty that he sees in our culture is the result of the low value that we place on the friendship relationship, but also in conjunction with the corresponding infatuation with romance, with romantic love and that particular relationship. And he says, and I'm quoting from him here, "Valentine's Day is a global fest of chocolates and roses, but when International Day of Friendship rolls around, it will rarely raise a buzz in our workplace or on social media." Did you celebrate International Day of Friendship this year? I didn't. It came and went without me noticing. It was at the end of July. Voisey goes on to say that this obsession with romance has even bedazzled the church world, which has produced Christian books and courses on dating and marriage aplenty, but very, very few on friendship. But you know, the thing about friendship is that it is quite possibly our most fundamental bond. I mean, for starters, it's something that anyone can be involved in. It's a relationship anyone can have, whatever age, whatever gender, whatever race, whatever life circumstance. We all have that capacity to be involved in friendship, even regardless of our intellectual ability, other things that are going on for us, our economic situation. Friendship is a fundamental bond open to all human beings. And it's also quite a unique bond because it's a bond that is, if you like, voluntarily maintained. Unlike marriage with its legal contract, unlike parenting with blood ties and ethical and legal responsibilities that parents have to children, unlike our work relationships where, you know, we have a contract with our employer. It's actually a bond that is, a friendship is a bond that is voluntarily maintained, and is, as I say, probably not one we give a lot of attention to. So I want to give it the main seat today as we think about the 4 values that will help us in travelling good relationships between Genesis and Revelation. Okay, so what makes for good friendship? Firstly, a commitment to being faithful. And I think both the reason for this and the inspiration for this has to do with that song that we heard at the beginning of the service. The song about every man, woman, boy and girl being made in the image of God. Every one of us made in a complex and beautiful way. It's what the psalmist in Psalm 139 describes like this. He says, "You made all the delicate inner parts of my body and knit me together in my mother's womb. Thank you for making me so wonderfully complex. Your workmanship is marvelous. How well I know that." And you know, this is true. This idea of being made in the image of God and having been knit together in a mysterious and complex and wonderful way, it's true of you. It's true of me. It's true of us, and it's true of them, whoever they may be. And I think that when we really appreciate this, and it's probably an appreciation with head and heart, then I think, you know, if we really understand this sense in which every human being is an image bearer and every human being has been wonderfully and complexly made in a beautiful way, then we are going to be motivated to treat each other with respect and dignity that goes with being an image bearer. You know, we're going to be more inclined not to abandon the other when the relationship goes through a difficult season. More inclined not to abandon each other by speaking out of turn about the other. We're going to be more inclined not to neglect our friends by making sure we do spend good time with them, by making sure that there's space in our lives, in our conversation, to hear what is happening for them, not being so full of ourselves that there's no space for them, but also paying others the respect of sharing in appropriate ways something about ourselves, being open and vulnerable in our friendships in that way. Now, I know that like other relationships, some friendships don't last, and sometimes there's good reason for that because they have always been or have become destructive. But I'm not talking about those sort of friendships. I'm talking here about good friendships. Good friendships that perhaps we don't even establish or we lose along the way. And I'm wondering just how much that happens because we haven't really got that full head and heart appreciation that the friends that we make, or the people that we have opportunity to make friends with, are image bearers, and they have been beautifully made by our Father God in his own image. So what makes for good friendship? Well, being faithful to the other does. And the second thing is an attitude of service. There's a doctor, or was a doctor, called John Gottman, and he, along with his colleagues, came up with a way of predicting the long-term viability of a relationship with 90% accuracy, based simply on observing conversation between two people. Gottman identified what he called, rather dramatically and beautifully, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, as far as 4 things that he and his colleagues would look for in conversations and would use to then determine whether or not a relationship had a chance of being viable long term. So, and he said that if any of these 4 horsemen of the apocalypse were evident in a conversation, there was a good chance that a relationship wouldn't last. Now, the first 2 of these are criticism and contempt, and you'd probably agree without any hesitation that these things are horrible to see in a relationship, and they can be very obvious in some conversations. So criticism and contempt. But then the second 2 that he identified are defensiveness and stonewalling. And by stonewalling, he's talking about when someone is evasive or doesn't engage or just point blank refuses to answer a question or respond to a comment. And I wonder if defensiveness and stonewalling, we don't like the sound of those words, but we might hesitate a little at those ones and go, well, sometimes I'm defensive because I need to defend myself. And sometimes you might call it stonewalling, but I'm actually just thinking about my response. So we might, be a little more protective of those 2 comments that he makes, or those 2 horsemen of the apocalypse. But at the end of the day, he says criticism, contempt, defensiveness and stonewalling. If you can see those in somebody's conversation, you can probably make a fairly accurate prediction about how that relationship will go. So if these 4 things are a death to a friendship, what might the remedy be? Well, from the point of view of the Christian worldview, we can't go beyond Jesus. And I want to lean into these words that were written by Paul and recorded in Philippians chapter 2. He says there, don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble, thinking of others as better than yourselves. Don't look out only for your own interests, but take an interest in others too. You must have the same attitude that Christ Jesus had. Though he was God, he did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. Instead, he gave up his divine privileges. He took the humble position of a slave and was born as a human being. When he appeared in human form, he humbled himself in obedience to God and died a criminal's death on a cross. You know, history tells us that Jesus was born in Bethlehem and raised in Nazareth, that in his early 30s he went with some understanding and willingness and intentionality to the painful and humiliating death on a Roman cross, with that declared intent of doing it for humankind, as an act of service for humankind, out of love for humankind. And this act of service, this thing that Jesus did for us, it is the remedy for all the evil and brokenness that was ushered into our experience of life so early on in the story of humankind. It's certainly the remedy for the destructive patterns of criticism, of contempt, of defensiveness and stonewalling. And I think it's true to say that Jesus' act of service, it gives us both the inspiration and somehow the power to counter destructive patterns in our relationships, and certainly to counter the destructive patterns of criticism and contempt and defensiveness and stonewalling by following his model and by being prepared to serve in the best interests of the welfare of the other. Now again, let me say quickly, I'm not talking about letting yourself be abused in a friendship, but I think it's true to say that this value of serving the other, it can be a real life-giving correction in our relationships. Carl Fays in his book talks about our current absorption with individualism, entitlement, my rights, and narcissism, it's always your fault, never mine. And I can see that this idea of being willing to serve the other can help bring those things of individualism, entitlement, and narcissism back into control, back into the place where they ought to be, which is no place in our relationship with other people. So, what makes for good friendship? Are you tracking with me? We've had faithfulness to the other. We've had being willing to serve the other. And I want to talk very briefly about forgiveness. That's the 4th value. We actually spent a whole message on forgiveness a few weeks ago, so I'm not going to speak long on this value today. I do encourage you to go back to the church website and check out for yourselves there the sermon message there. You can listen to it on podcast or watch it on YouTube. Really, all I want to say today is that I think we need to work out this forgiveness thing, and we need to then figure out how to deal with the pain of hurt in our friendships so it doesn't destroy them. I'm talking about the pain that lasts after the sorries have been said and after the forgiveness has been offered. And I think again we can look to Jesus. We can see how he did this. He was betrayed and hurt in terrible ways by his closest friends, but he knew they were sorry, and he stayed in relationship with them, and he somehow was able to do that without continually putting his hurt, which was real and there still, back onto them. And I think being able to do the same ourselves is a very important thing, and I think it's a possible thing for us if we have confidence in these words recorded in Romans chapter 3. You and I are made right with God by placing our faith in Jesus Christ. This is true, says Paul, for anyone who believes, for everyone who believes, no matter who we are. And I think knowing that I am made right with God, that you are made right with God through Jesus, is both the inspiration and the confidence to be able to be forgiving people and to be able to live in that space where we don't keep putting the hurt that we carry back onto the people in our friendships, in our relationships, so that we can go forward with them. So good friendship depends on being faithful and loyal to our friends. It depends on our willingness to act in service for them. It does depend on our capacity to forgive and then not carry hurt on and on into our relationship. And the last one is the gift of time. Ouch. That's a hard one, the gift of time. I think we're really conditioned in our society, in the Western world at least, towards efficiency. And most of us, not all of us, but I'd say probably many of us listening today and involved in this worship service today, we've got a long list of things we have to do, and we probably have a long list of things we really want to do. And so time is such a precious, precious resource to us. When I was writing this part of the message on Tuesday this week, I stopped and did a little bit of a stock take, and I could easily list half a dozen ways or half a dozen times that I had acknowledged my poorness of time already by Tuesday in the week. Here's just a few of them. I won't tell them all to you. I'd said to my husband, oh gosh, I wish I had more time. If I wasn't working full time, I'd be able to make some meals and take them down to Mandurah for our daughter. She's been really sick for the last fortnight with a flu, not COVID. And I bemoaned my lack of time. I heard myself saying at one stage, I didn't get time to weed the veggie patch on the weekend. I heard myself saying, I haven't seen my friend Denny for weeks. I need to make some time to do that this weekend. And then also, oh gosh, I'm not going to get time to see my daughter-in-law on Friday because I'm going away on the board retreat. It's a very real thing, the preciousness of the resource of time and our struggle with that. Gordon MacDonald has written a book called A Resilient Life, and in that book he has a chapter on friendship. And in the chapter on friendship, the main point that he really makes is that what friendships need for us in this day and age is more linger time. He says that's not something that he does naturally very well, but he's learnt that from his daughter. Time to be together without agenda, without needing to rush off. And I think, again, when you look at the life of Jesus, the stories of Jesus in the Bible, you'll see two things. Firstly, that there was probably more natural lingering time in his everyday life. I mean, he and his disciples, his friends, when they wanted to get from A to B, they had to walk. And there was therefore naturally more time just to be together in the hours and sometimes days that it took for them to move about from place to place. But I also notice when I read the stories of Jesus that he made lingering time. He factored lingering time into the everyday. And we read those stories where Jesus says to his friends, okay, let's stop now. Let's go away from the crowd. Let's go away and just make some time to be together. So he built lingering time into his everyday. So then I had to think about, where do I linger best? In what relationships do I linger best? And for me in this season, I actually do that best in relationship with my grandchildren, not because of anything awesome about me or because of anything intentional that I decided to do, but simply because if you want to be with kids, all you can do is be with them. There's really not a lot of opportunity, not a lot of space to do 16 other things while you are being with them. So if I am taking a bushwalk, I'm absorbed in the bushwalk with my kids. I'm absorbed in the glitter gluing with my grandkids. I'm absorbed in the story reading or the puddle jumping or the bath time. It's just necessary. And I've realised that I actually need to learn to linger in some of my other relationships, in my friendships. And I've realised in preparing this message that the more that I understand these values, these first three values, particularly about friendships, about relationships, probably the more likely I am to linger. You see, the more that I have that feeling or that understanding that the other person is wonderfully made, a wonderfully made image bearer, I think that will inspire my faithfulness to them. I have no trouble believing that of my grandchildren, you see. So being inspired to see my friends, see others in my life as wonderfully made image bearers, the more I'm prepared to serve the other, I think the more likely I am to want to linger with them. Again, I have no problem in serving my grandchildren. The more I am willing to forgive them, no problems again with the grandchildren, then I think the more that I understand those first three values and appreciate them in my friendships and other relationships, the more likely I am to find time to linger with my friends, to linger with other people in different relationships. So these four values, faithfulness, service, forgiveness and time, they actually make for good relationship in all of our relationships, friendship, marriage, parenting, work relationships. And I think they are important values in our relationship with God as well. So my question, two questions, as we end the message this week. Where might you need to step up relationally? And what can you do about that this week?